Lessons from Atari. Atari had some fundamental tenets about making games. The one that struck with me perhaps the most was from Vice President Steve Calfee. He said, "Never do half a favor," and that includes game features. Steve and Atari evangelized the idea that any feature made for a game had to be full, complete, and polished. There had to be natural, intuitive transitions from one scene or level to the next. Nothing should feel rushed or leaving the player questioning why something did or did not happen. And whatever the player saw, it had to be interacted with in some way. At one point, he suggested the biggest half-favor failing was missing the action defeat action reward loop, where the player must learn how to do things in the game, get defeated, so that victory will be sweet, and then master those things in the game so that they will win the scene or level. And then the gratuitous reward, a romp through the once threatening foes or area, slaughtering them in a satisfying wake of destruction, or a big score tally counting up the success in a fanfare finale. Or reclaiming of a lost treasure like a skateboard or romantic partners. Games were formulaic, even if they were in different genres, he insisted. Some game designers would design too many features, so developers would spend all their time delivering them to minimum viable feature quality versus delivering a few features to high, fun, polished quality. Over-designing was the doom of any otherwise good game concept or feature. I would quote Atari's "never do someone or a game feature half a favor" throughout my career in hopes of guiding designers and developers and producers to find a healthy balance between the addiction to iteration and shovelware development strategies, to instead to pursue quality development within budget and time. I argued there was always a balance to support a profitable business while legitimately delivering a satisfying, fun game experience to the consumer. But inexperienced designers often believed every idea they came up with was pure genius, and it had to be in the game. And so, none of their features would become great or polished. They became, at best, okay. The consequence was that their great games were not so great. They were not well received and not well reviewed, as you would expect, and thus they sold fewer copies. And then the designer got lesser gigs, and the designer would spiral down and potentially even out of the game industry entirely, all because they tried to design too much. They were addicted to design iteration, or they could not prioritize what mattered most. They did not have a design filter or a creative razor. Good games usually have the leanest designs that deliver the intended immersion and experience without clouding or confusing or mucking it up with piles of dung dripping around its core features. I would espouse throughout my career and strive to live by Steve's "never do half a favor," because it made sense to me to do only great things. I despise the idea of doing something poorly or hastily because the result is something that I will not appreciate. I want things with long-term value. I do not want shunts, hacks, or quick fixes. In conclusion, I would not do half favors. I would only do full favors, or nothing at all. Throughout my career, over and over, I have seen designers focus on concepts and ideas that they would love to experience and play themselves. While someone is the market, designing for yourself will work because you are literally designing for the consumer, because you happen to be the consumer. But what happens when you are asked to work on games that are not interesting to you? They are the types of games that you do not play or even like yourself. The answer is always the same. Determine who your target consumer is and figure out what they want in their games. Prototype and focus test the features and concepts with those target consumers in their demographic or psychographic, and then refine the feature or concepts according to the consumer test feedback. Well, you would think that would seem obvious in that list. It's pretty basic. There was and is never a moment when a designer should ask themselves, what do I want? The designer always needs to ask, what does the consumer want? The bottom line, always design for your target consumer, not for yourself. Atari used to say that a game cannot evolve more than 10 to 20% new in concept or features. The idea was that people can only grok and learn so much new at a time. And if they are given too much new information to process, they will become unhappy and they will blame the game for their negative feelings. And so each game or feature is supposed to build off of a pre-existing game, feature, or mechanic so that they can grok it. In the same way, games have brand identity and characters and environments and rewards and loot. And they have multiplayer matchmaking lobbies and all sorts of technical functional features. And game genres like shooters, racing, sports, adventure, role-playing games, and so forth have often had vastly different and complicated user interfaces and more traditional designs and features relative to their genres. To make games fun and understandable, game and interface and features and world and story designs must all be extensions from a familiar thing to the consumer. Too much change or new will result in a bad game experience. Too little change will be seen as repetitive, lazy, a rip-off sequel. So what it all means, you can apply a maximum of 20% new in game design or features in any original or sequel game. Anything else, anything more, will likely result in an unhappy, frustrated consumer and thus a bad, failed game. Products and companies succeed for a multitude of different reasons. My experience has been that designers or executives that drift from their core business or culture that made them successful in the first place tend to destroy the very companies and products that they become in charge of. Consumers choose your company and products for a reason. It is okay to evolve a product by adding up to 20% new and different features, as we explained. But changing more can not only add complexity and confusion to users, but it can create consternation with how it feels as a brand. It is complicated to explain. Know your brand and stay true to it, or face the consequences of consumer backlash. I had to adopt the design for the consumer concept myself and hold on to it very close to my heart. For I had to, and did, sell my soul to sports when I worked for Atari Games and later for Electronic Arts. Never had I been into sports, and was likewise not into computer or video game versions of sports. However, I wanted to make money and advance in my career. It was obvious that adventure and role-playing games earned a fraction of the revenue that sports and racing games earned. And thus, I made a deal with Atari Vice President Steve Calvi to work on RBI Baseball, a sports series. And then I made Dick Vitale Awesome Baby Basketball, a sports game. It felt like I had sacrificed a part of me by embracing making games for other people to just play, and not for myself or to make people better with compelling stories. But my income and position and responsibility rose very steadily and quickly as I engaged with sports games. And it was my sports experience that aided me in my eventual working for Electronic Arts in Canada. On a totally random other side, Dick Vitale pulled a shotgun from a golf club bag and shot an invading alligator on a Florida golf course during a visit with him about his game being made by us at Atari. Crazy stuff. Anyway, the quality assurance or QA manager, Mike Klug at Atari Games Consumer, often delivered coin-op arcade machines to local operations like arcades or even individuals who had enough money to purchase or lease an arcade unit. He had the fortune of being asked to deliver a coin-op to Steve Jobs' house in Cupertino. But Steve's house did not have a doorway large enough to move the huge arcade machine into the room that he wanted it in. Even removing the doors and hinges was not enough to get the arcade machine into the room. But there was a solution. There was an enclosed courtyard that had an internal-facing large sliding window that reached the room. But the only way into the courtyard was the sky that looked upwards to the clouds. Well, Mike just had to raise the coin-op somehow up and over the house and down into the courtyard center so that they could use the sliding window and deliver the coin-op. How does one raise a several hundred-pound heavy wooden arcade cabinet packed with electronics and a massive TV display over a house? The answer was actually simple: a helicopter. That's right, Atari Games hired a utility helicopter to pick up and transport the coin-op arcade unit to Steve Jobs' house. That was the purest sign of wealth and decadence to a gamer, to me. Another tale of helicopters in Atari was on a hot day. We were all asked to go outside and wait for a massive new air conditioning unit to be delivered and installed on Atari's headquarters building, where we all worked. Having been evacuated for our safety, the huge double-propeller utility helicopter arrived carrying a multi-ton air conditioning unit. The unit was to be lowered onto the building roof and then bolted down before wired and activated. As we waited, the chopper stopped, though, in motion and hovered. We could see the pilot pull out a banana and begin to eat it. We watched in dismay. He then pulled out a half sandwich and ate that too, washing it down with something from a thermos. He spent 15 minutes to the second on a break, hovering in the helicopter. Later, it was explained to us that he was on a union break. It was due, and so he took it. That day made clear to me that rules might be stupid, especially if they don't make sense and can hurt other people. We literally stood there for 15 minutes, everyone that worked at Atari, waiting for some random dude to finish his banana and sandwich. The idea that a union would force such a rigid policy made me question the value or intelligence of unions, their leaders, or their policies.